it's only this club that could produce anything like that. But it's one of the reasons I adore the club, because you know what? We may not have won anything, but I'll tell you something, I've never been bored, not for 1 minute this whole run. You can't be bored following Newcastle United.
Hey everyone, and welcome to 10 Questions with John Gibson. As many of you know, Gibbo is a legend of Northeast journalism and sport, and today he'll be sharing his story with us. He's been covering Newcastle United for over 5 decades, so I cannot wait to hear about his journey. Do remember to subscribe for more Newcastle content, and let's get into it. Thank you so much for joining me, Gibbo. How are you?
Absolute, my pleasure. I'm good. Despite my team, I'm good.
Well, we have 10 questions, but I just know you're full of stories. So let's jump straight into the first one. This is early days. We're talking 1966, and it's when you started your illustrious journey at the Chronicle. And it was quite an exciting time actually to be working in sports journalism, because just a few weeks in, you were covering, England winning the World Cup. So what were your ambitions and dreams as a young sports writer?
Well, initially, when all my friends in Benwell, I lived in the West End of Newcastle as a child, all my friends wanted to play for Newcastle United. All the little guys wanted to play for Newcastle United. Amazingly, I didn't. I wanted to write about Newcastle United right from the start, always as a little lad. My grandma, who brought me up, made me a scrapbook, which was made out of brown paper, folded in half, and she sewed up the side, and I cut photographs of Newcastle players out of the newspaper and wrote a little story about them underneath. And these people included Joe Harvey and Jackie Milburn, people that I was going to then work with in later life that I didn't realize was going to be so. And I also had a privileged upbringing sports-wise, because as a little lad, a schoolboy in grey trousers and a school cap, I actually sat in 1951, 52 and 55 when Newcastle won the FA Cup, 3 years out of 5. I sat in my Auntie Grace's house. It was the only house in the family that had a television set. It was a little black and white size of a postage stamp, and we all sat in rows of chairs watching those 3 finals. And of course, Newcastle won all 3. And so I was absolutely hooked on Newcastle United, on the glamour, on the romance, on the proudness of being a Geordie, never realising, by the way, that we were never going to win a domestic trophy again, because we haven't since those days. So I was born and bred into it. And funny enough, I started on the Chronicle before 1966, but only doing non-league stuff. And I went off to Fleet Street. I believed in those days that all journals want to go to Fleet Street, all doctors want to go to Harley Street, and I was down in Fleet Street, and I never really intended to come back. That was going to be my career. However, I got a phone call in 1966 from the Chronicle, my old newspaper, saying, "Would you like to come back, Gibbo, and cover Newcastle United?" Well, dearie me, if you adore Newcastle like I adore Newcastle, how do you say no to that? So, working on the presumption that Shy Ben's getting out, I said, of course I'll come back, but will you give me the World Cup finals and the Olympic Games, which meant I had something every 2 years. That was the icing on the cake, going all over the world. If they'd said not on your life, on your bike, I would have still come back to cover Newcastle. But amazingly, they didn't. And so there I was. It was about the May time in 1966. I'd come back to cover Newcastle United. But first of all, we had the World Cup, the 1966 World Cup. I covered the games up in the Northeast, which included North Korea, who were up here. Nobody's, not South Korea, North Korea. And They start beating everybody, and it was wonderful. And I ended up at Wembley watching England win the World Cup. That was 66. By 68, 69, I was watching Newcastle win a European Cup, and I thought, this is fabulous. This is going to be my life. I'm just going to see England or Newcastle win something every few years. I am now sitting here in front of you, and England have won nothing since the World Cup, and Newcastle United have won nothing since that European Cup. And I've become unique because I'm the only person still walking and talking that actually saw those things and are still working. So it's been a unique journey, but it's been a wonderful journey. We may not have won much or won nothing, but we've done it with a style and a flourish, and that has made life worth living.
Absolutely. And you're very lucky, actually. And it's funny, you got your dream start, you're working sports writing, trophies, trophies, trophies. This is great. Like you said, little did you know that as time goes on, that's not the norm, and you weren't likely to experience that again. But just touching upon, just 3 years later was when obviously Newcastle, they won their first European trophy. And it was actually the first season that Newcastle had even competed in Europe, and they came back with the cup. You must be full of stories from the Fairs Cup.
Wonderful, wonderful days. And it's my pleasure today. I'm president of the Fairs Club, which is a club of Newcastle United supporters who supported them in those wonderful days and travelled all over Europe. They formed their own club, of which they made me president as the only journalist from that group of hacks who are still working today. And I'm president of that club. And I become friends with a lot of those players. And it was a very special team. We were very naive. We went into the first game Newcastle ever had in Europe, 1968. They played Feyenoord, who had a wonderful record in Europe. And we won 4-0 at St James's Park, and we thought, well, this is an absolute dolly. This is a doddle. We love this. This is good. And we went to the away game, and we got slaughtered. We only lost 2-0, so we were through an aggregate, but we were lucky to get nil. We were absolutely horrendous. But every game was special, and the Chronicle ran trips for fans to go over there. We had bus loads of people going down the south coast and over to the continent. Fabulous, fabulous days. And we ended up playing Ujpestoza, which these days to young fans, and probably to your good self, would mean next to nothing. They're a Hungarian side. Hungary is a very poor football nation now. But you've got to remember back then, in the 50s, they'd been the greatest side in the world when they had Pushkas and everything before the uprising. The uprising, which was put down by the Russians, the Hungarian uprising, so all their superstars flood the country and leave to go to places like Spain, etc., to play because the lockdown in their country. But this one club stayed alive and had a wonderful, wonderful side. To give you an impression of how good they were, in the semi-final of the Fairs Cup, before they played us, Ujpestoza had played Leeds United, and this was the fabulous Leeds side of Don Revie. And Leeds United that season won the First Division Championship with Premier League now, the First Division Championship, and only lost 2 games all season to win the Championship of England, and yet they lost home and away to Ujpestoza, home and away, both legs to Ujpestoza. And so Don Revie was saying, sorry, Newcastle have got no chance in the final. Bill Shankly at Liverpool, sorry, no chance. Jock Stein at Celtic, sorry, no chance. This was the best side in Europe at the time. They just happened to be in the Fairs Cup. And lo and behold, God bless us, we won 3-0 at Newcastle and 3-2 out in Budapest, having allowed them a 2-goal start. They were leading us 2-0 at half time. So we beat them 6-2 on aggregate. And it was unbelievable. We based the whole concept of the team on the little and large up front. We had Wyn Davies and Pop Robson. One big guy, Wyn Davies, small guy, Pop Robson. And I always remember talking to continental footballers who'd seen nothing like Wyn. Wyn, bless him, couldn't play on the ground. I mean, his feet were just absolutely nowhere. He was hopeless, bless him. But in the air, he was stupendous. He was better than Douglas Bader in the air, but on the ground. And they said, but excuse me, the name of the game is football. You play with your feet. This guy plays with his head. They couldn't handle him at all. And when the sort of friendship we had in those days, when we brought the cup back to Newcastle, I was busy ghosting the autobiography of the Newcastle skipper, who was Bob Moncur. And the amazing thing is, he was a defender. He was a sweeper, played at the back like Bobby Moore in the England World Cup side. But he scored a hat-trick over the 2 legs of the final. He never got over the halfway line in his life until we played in the final, and he scored a hat-trick over the 2 legs in the final. And he was a very, very good pal of mine. And I remember when we got back into Newcastle, it was mid-June by the time we won the Cup, right in the summer. I lived in Whitley Bay. I had a young family, lived in Whitley Bay at the time, down on the coast. And Bob come down on a Sunday afternoon to have a few sherbets out in the garden. Beautiful day. We just won the Cup. Get the sherbets out in the garden. And he popped down and he said, "Oh, wait a minute, Gibbo, I forgot something." Went out to the car, and on the back seat of the car was the European Fairs Cup, the cup. And he
His car?
he picked it out of the car, brought it in, stuck it on the lawn, on my lawn. We were in 2 deck chairs, and we got the little white wines out. Sally, my daughter, was 2, and we looked round, and she's playing mud cups in the cup. She's getting handfuls of mud and putting it in the top of the cup, which was a complete and utter mess. Everybody would have been horrendously if they'd seen the thing, but they didn't, of course. And the wonderful thing, because it would never happen these days, but it did then. Because I was already writing the Newcastle United story, as well as Bob's book at the time, that kept one chapter open during this for me to write about Europe. And they said, just keep going, do it on round by round. And of course, we got through the final. So half the book was on European Fairs Cup. And it come out so quickly because it was all done. It come out within about 4 months of us winning the Cup.
Whoa.
Into the next season, we are playing on a Saturday at home at St. James's Park. And I've got a book signing session in the local bookshop in the centre of the city for 12 noon. Every single Newcastle United player that had played in that cup final came down for the book signing. They're playing 3 hours later in a first division game up at St. James's Park. The whole team come down to the book signing. They brought the cup. We all lined up along a long table with me sitting in the middle, every player alongside him, and the cup on the end. And the queues of Newcastle fans were 4 times round the corners of the bookshop, because they were seeing the world. And I had the photograph taken with the cup, got the book signed all the way down, and left at the other end.
On match day?
On match day, 3 hours before kickoff. Can you imagine, A, a club allowing that today on a match day? And B, can you imagine a full team of players turning up for a hack? Because there was nothing in it for them. But that's the sort of friendship we had, and that's the sort of love. And it still exists. That team are still, they old age pensioners, every one of them, but like myself. We've lost a couple of them, bless them, that have actually died, but they are still heroes in Newcastle, because no other person has won anything since they did, all the way back in 1969. So you get all these old age pensioners coming up here and being hailed like the Beatles. You know, it's ridiculous. It could only happen in Newcastle, but happy days.
Wow. And you've touched on this, but obviously throughout your career, you've built a number of meaningful, unique friendships with former players, industry people. And for me, quite a notable one is obviously your friendship with Malcolm McDonald, aka Super Mac. Now,
yeah.
And for some young viewers, I believe he still remains Newcastle United's 5th highest goal scorer of all time.
Yeah.
And so I'd like you to tell me just a bit more about that bond, because I read some really interesting stories.
Yeah, he was a gobby young upstart when he come to sign for Newcastle. He was just 21. He had never played in the top division of football. He had been a left back in the Southern League, not even in the Football League when he started at Tunbridge. And then he went to Fulham, where he developed as a player, ironically, under Bobby Robson, who's the man that that converted him from a left back to a centre forward. It was Bobby Robson as
Wow.
manager of Fulham that converted him, and he becomes such a good centre forward that not only did he play for England, but he still holds the record for the most goals scored in one game for England at Wembley. We played Cyprus in a European qualifier while he was playing at Newcastle United. We beat Cyprus 5-0 and he scored all 5 goals. And I was upstairs in the press box at the time to watch him do that. He was the original superstar. I mean, he was over the top. He smoked huge cigars. He quaffed champagne. He walked like John Wayne with bandy legs and a strut. He was the way we would imagine all superstars ought to be. He never hid his light under a bushel. And we became very, very close mates during his time here and afterwards when he was manager of Fulham, and even when he went over and lived in Italy for a short while. And about 12 years ago, he got married to Carol. And Carol's an interesting lady because she'd been brought up in show, she's a Geordie girl. She'd been brought up in show business because she was married to Brian Johnson, who's the lead singer of AC/DC. You know, the pop group AC/DC? Yeah, Brian Johnson, the lead singer, is a Geordie. It's an Australian group, but he's a Geordie and he's the lead singer. He was married to Carol. I knew Carol and Brian as a couple up here because Geordie, he was in a group called Geordie in the Northeast at the time, Brian Johnson, and he left Geordie to join AC/DC. And so I knew him as Geordie, and because he was a huge Newcastle, and still is a huge Newcastle United fan. So I knew Carol and him that way. And Super Mac was my best mate. And lo and behold, they get married. Now, and I was best man, inevitably. But isn't it wonderful that you can be best man, not just for the bridegroom, but for the bride as well, because the bride knew me as well as the bridegroom knew me. And they're still my dear friends to this day and come up here and have lunch and dinner with me. And I sit beside Supermac at all the Newcastle United matches, well, social distancing now, but normally. And it's been a pleasure. And I've had that sort of relationship, been very, very lucky with lots of players. Bob Moncur, who I told you, is godfather to one of my girls. Irving Natris, that was in the 74 Cup final, is godfather to one of my other girls. Gaza has been a huge friend for all of his life. Glenn McCrory, who's the only Northeast world boxing champion we've ever had, I grew up with, and we've made loads of television documentaries together. We actually brought, you're far too young to realize this, but you may have heard, or Dad may have told you, about Jerry Lee Lewis, the rock and roller, that played Great Balls of Fire and all that in the old days. That's when I was a kid. He played a concert at the City Hall in Newcastle way back in the day, the 50s and 60s, when he was in his heyday. And he wrote in his autobiography that it was the greatest venue that he played, and he's played throughout the world. So, of course, Glenn and I, who are village idiots that love a challenge, immediately saw that as a challenge. Can we bring him back? And we actually got in touch with him in Memphis, and we arranged for him to come to Newcastle just 10 years ago and to do a live gig in Newcastle back at the centre. And was McCrory, the boxing champion, and myself, that put the gig on in Newcastle.
Really?
Absolutely. And for Jerry Lee Lewis, and we've got the tape to this day. And he was holed up in a hotel for 4 days. He was like Howard Hughes. He never come out his hotel room. He lived in his hotel room and got all his food sent in. He had a machine, one-arm bandit, put in his room, and he just played the one-arm bandit all day, went up on stage, sang Great Balls of Fire, sang for 38 minutes, only said 2 words in between every song, and walked off at the end without coming back for an encore. That was the sort of guy he was. But talking of friendship, I owned Gateshead later on. I owned Gateshead Football Club. I did that because that was my other club. When I was a kid, I used to walk all the way to St James's Park from the west end of Newcastle to watch Newcastle play. And when Newcastle were away, I couldn't afford to go away. We didn't have two pennies to rub together. So I used to walk down to town, do a right over the Tyne Bridge and go and watch Gateshead play in the old Third Division North at Gateshead. I then cut my teeth when I first joined the Chronicle as a kid by reporting on Gateshead when they were playing non-league soccer. And then I bought the club. Around the time of the Entertainers, I bought Gateshead Football Club on the theory of A, it was my second love, and B, all us hacks go around, telling football clubs how they should run their business. We all sit there telling Newcastle United how it should be run, etc., etc. And I thought, why don't you put your money where your mouth is? Why don't you try to run a football club? See how difficult it is, see how hard it is, take the challenge, see if you know anything on that side of the game. So I bought Gateshead and I owned them for 11 years. And when I ran into financial trouble at Gateshead because we lost our sponsors and I launched an appeal, Save Gateshead. The two people that come forward in this is talking about friendships to help me raise money and were truly magnificent were Paul Gascoigne and Alan Shearer. And Alan Shearer put on a huge do at Newcastle within St James's Park. He gave it totally free. He sold it out to 2,000 people. We played Sheffield Wednesday before the do, and he scored a hat trick. He scored a hat trick, which wasn't surprising. He always scored hat tricks. But he came up the tunnel as the team come in. I went down into the press room. He walked up the tunnel. Instead of turning left into the dressing room, he turned right and went in, come into the press room, completely with his Newcastle United gear on, all the mud and the sweat running down his face. So it said, "Where's Gibbo?" Saw me in the corner, walked across, peeled off his shirt, threw it at me. He said, "There, auction that forgets it." And it was the shirt he scored a hat trick in, which was absolutely fabulous. And we put Gascoigne on. The other big do was Gascoigne for nothing. We put him on in Gateshead because he was born in Gateshead, you see. So it was a local lad trying to save Gateshead. And I arranged, he was playing at Burnley at the time, and I arranged for him. We sold out 700 tickets in 6 hours for Gascoigne, and I had to open the upstairs balcony and sell another 200 tickets because it was Gascoigne, who was so funny. And I remember getting him to do the show and then suddenly thinking, blimey, I hope he turns up. What if I've sold out? I'm preening myself for selling out the show. And then I think, bloody hell, what if he doesn't turn up? And he must have been thinking the same way, because I'm in the Chronicle office and I get a phone call this day and I pick up the phone. I said, "Hello?" He said, a voice said, "Hello, is that Gibbo?" I said, "Yeah, it is." He says, "It's Stan Ternentier, who at the time was manager of Burnley and happened to be a Geordie." I said, "Oh, hi, Stan, how you doing, big man?" He said, "I'm good." He said, "I believe you've got Paul Gascoigne up next week to do a Gateshead thing." I said, "Yeah, that's right." He said, "Well, look, I've got to tell you, I'm terribly sorry. It's International Fortnight." I said, "Yeah, that's why I arranged it then." He said, "Well, I'm going to take them away for all-weather training in Spain during the fortnight." He said, "So Gaza won't be able to come." And I said, "You what? He got after I've sold 700 tickets. The place is heaving, and he's not going to come because you're taking him to Spain." And then I heard this raucous laughter in the background, and it was Gaza who was in the office with the manager. He'd phone Gibbo up and say, "I can't come." And he did come, and he was absolutely fabulous. An absolute fruitcake. I mean, every time I get up to make a speech or do an auction or anything, he's getting the pepper pot and putting it on my steak and under my steak. Thinks I can't see what he's doing, but of course I can. And he's so babyish. But what I adore about him, he's got a heart the size of a frying pan. He would do a favour to everybody. And I think that's one of his problems, and that's why he's got in the situation he's in now, bless him. But I just remember him with massive affection, massive gratitude, and above all, I remember him because he's one of the greatest players I've ever seen play. Not just one of the greatest Geordies, one of the greatest players. And it was a privilege to see him. And like I love Bestie, I love Gaza, and I prefer to remember them within the pomp than any other way.
Wow, that's so sweet. These friendships with former players, they're clearly built on, mutual respect, trust, fond
Hmm.
memories over the years, the ups and downs. I did come across a really sweet photo actually of you and Gaza, and he was very young, and you were handing him a trophy.
Yeah,
Where was that from?
I've got these horrendous jeans on, if I remember. Such quite amazing, but it was terrific because it was good fun. Naturally, when you've got my job, you end up presenting things at various dues, and often it was to present them to kids because kids love that sort of thing. So I went along this day to present trophies at Red Youth Boys Club, and
Ah,
there I am on stage, and all the kids come up in a long file, and you hand each one a trophy, and off he goes, and they're just kids. I mean that nicely, but they're not famous. They're young kids, and along has come this cheeky, chubby-faced little cockney so cockney so-and-so, and he got his trophy and all that. And it was only years later when I started knocking about with him, and he was the dog's dinner, that he one night come and he produced this photograph. He said, "Gibbo, can you remember that?" And I went, "Well, I know that's me, but it was that little." It was. He said his mum and dad kept the photograph. You see, they'd taken it when you went past me, and he had that. He had the photograph, and that's how this photograph came about. And it happened twice more to me. The same thing. Once
oh,
with Chris Waddle, Chris Waddle, England, Marseille, European Cup final, great star of our team, our Keegan team. When he was a little kid, or just afterwards, he was playing for Clark Chapman's, which was a works firm. And John Connolly, who was a Newcastle winger, and myself went across to do the same thing there. We took some photographs with the whole of the team and shook hands, give them trophies. And he showed me the picture years later, and it was the waddler getting the trophy off me. And the third one
wow.
was Steve Cram, the runner.
No
That's
way.
yeah, the Olympic guy that's got a. I presented him trophies when he was at school. I think he was 16, and he was taller than I was because he was always this big, gangling blonde lad. He was a giraffe. He was
He's
taller than
very
I was.
lanky. He's like a
Hi,
Peter
I'm looking up
Crouch.
to him when he's a kid, shaking hands with him. And he produced this later and said, "Look, so how lucky can you be? You present trophies to kids, and the kids turn out from being ducklings that become swans, that turn out to be Gascoigne, Waddle, and Crammy. What sort of hat trick's that? Brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, you've
Brilliant.
got the Midas touch.
I got lucky. I got lucky. They discovered me.
It's nice they kept hold of the sentimental photos, actually. That's really sweet. And they
Mm.
put two and two together. So now, if we can talk about the FA Cup in 1974. Now, Newcastle, they'd won through every round away from home, and obviously they'd reached the final up against Liverpool at Wembley. Huge affair. It was certainly an eventful one. Please tell me about that day and the team on that day as well.
Mm, mm. I would like to start just by mentioning the build-up because we always like this. Geordie's all the same, We always have a wonderful build-up and then a huge anticlimax at the end. We always do marvelous, and we have a honeymoon and then a divorce. It's always the getting there. I mean, 74 we got to the final. 76 we got the League Cup final, 98 we got to the FA Cup final, 99 we got to the FA Cup final. But all my wonderful memories are not at Wembley because we failed every single time at Wembley, but it was getting there. And it was like that in 74. We got through every round away from home, which is the hardest way to do it, as you would appreciate. Super Matt, my mate, Newcastle number 9 legends, and we know what number 9 means to Newcastle United fans, scored in every round away from home. So, to get to the cup final like that, we played Burnley in the semi-final, and we had played Nottingham Forest in the quarterfinals. It took 3 matches to beat them because one game had to be replayed because of a crowd invasion. Then it was a 0-0 draw, and then we won. So we played 3 matches, and we were almost upon the Burnley game, the semi-final. And I always remember being in Sheffield. It was at Hillsborough. And on the night time before the game, I'm in the hotel having a few sherbets with Ian Lafreniere, who's a big friend of mine. He's the guy that wrote The Likely Lads, Off Wheater's End Pet, Lovejoy, all the big television shows. He wrote them before he went out to Hollywood, where he's lived ever since out there. But he was in the hotel with me, and the fire alarm went off. It was about 11:15. I said, evacuate the hotel. We think there's a fire in the hotel. So we're all going. I mean, there's some people standing out on the street in their pajamas, in their dressing gowns, etc. The whole team, the night before the play semi-final of the cup, the whole team are standing outside the hotel, having evacuated the hotel. Ian and I were only worried that our ice cold bottle of white wine would be getting warm with the flames licking around it, and we wanted to get back in to drink it before it was a hot toddy. But that was a great story for me in the paper the next day. You know, United stars on brink of Wembley, standing out in a crisis, standing outside a hotel in Sheffield. And we got through that through our two Supermacs. Matt Fall, the goalkeeper in the first half, saved everything, keep Burnley out. And MacDonald, our centre forward, scored the 2 goals in the second half to get us there. We got to the final and didn't get a kick. We really didn't get a kick in the final. And some little swine, I don't know what eventually happened to him, but he was called Kevin Keegan, orchestrated the win for Liverpool, of which I told him when he arrived up here later as a player and then as a manager, never forgive him for that as long as he lived. And I said, don't you curry favour with the Geordies. They dislike you for Wembley 74. And we were lucky to get naught that day. And that was often the case with us in finals. But treasured memories of that team. And Joe Harvey was a wonderful manager. You know, he built 3 separate sides in 11 years in Newcastle. He built the 65 side that won the second division championship to get us promoted when we were in the doldrums. He then built the 69 side that won the European Fairs Cup. And then he built the 74 side with Supermac that got to Wembley and won the Anglo-Italian Cup and things like that. Everybody laughs at that, but it was a very difficult tournament. There were one-off games against the top Italian sides. We went to play Roma in Rome in the Olympic Stadium and beat them. We played Fiorentina and Florence in the final and beat them. We played some wonderful sides and won that trophy. And Harvey was extra special.
Wow, nice. It must have been quite cool actually at the 74 final to see obviously Kevin Keegan, and that was his very first FA Cup final. It's just a shame he wasn't in the black and white stripes to be scoring those 2 goals.
Oh, that's again, by the way, I stopped my mate walking out of the cup final at Wembley. Stuart Barraclough, a winger who I knew very, very well. He was a little lad out of Yorkshire, played for Barnsley, had the full Yorkshire accent. I used to pop into nightclubs now and again in those days, just to be sociable, you understand, and to while away the hours. Nothing else, just, you know, I thought it's nice to be sociable.
Be rude not to, yeah.
Go and meet people, you know what I mean? It seemed to be a good thing to do. Anyway, Barry used to always be with us, and everybody used to phone up, one or two punters who were naughty used to phone up Joe and said, do you realise Stuart Barraclough was in the nightclub last night? And by the way, I've got to emphasise, it was always when it was allowed. It wasn't the night before a game. It was midweek when there was no midweek game. But he used to phone up and say he was drunk in the nightclub. And what they didn't know was that Barra didn't drink. He couldn't be drunk because he didn't drink. But he drank Coke, and they thought it was rum and Coke. And because he leapt about and rolled about laughing, and he was like a dervisher, they thought he must be 7 parts to the wind, like, you know. And they used to phone up and say he was drunk. He was a lovely, lovely little lad. He was dropped from the FA Cup final team. And
because of that?
Barraclough was dropped, having played in earlier rounds. He was dropped for the final because they wanted to flood the midfield with players to try to kill off Liverpool's attack. It worked exactly the opposite way. And Supermac said it stopped us having any chance of winning the cup final because Supermac and Tudor relied on Barraclough getting down the wing and sticking in the crosses because they were so good in the air. But anyway, Barra learned on the Thursday that he wasn't going to play on the Saturday in the cup final. And I was downstairs in the bar having a cup of coffee, not a drink, in the bar. And I got one of the lads come in, one of the team, and they said, hey, Barry's in an awful state. He's just learned from the gaffer. He's not playing the cup final. I think he's going to go home. I said, oh, bloody hell. Right. So I went upstairs to his room, knocked on the door, went in. Sure enough, he had his suitcase on the bed and he's thrown
Oh.
things in the suitcase. And I said, look, Barry, do not do this. Sit and think. You're going to not only kill your career at Newcastle if you walk out on the eve of a cup final, walk out on your club and your team. The fans are going to hate you regardless of whether they think you're justified in being upset or not. They're going to hate you. And other clubs aren't going to want you because they're going to see you as a troublemaker. The sort of guy that'll, the hell with the team. I'm spitting my dummy out the pram, etc., etc. And I persuaded him to actually stay and not do that. He wasn't even going to be subbed. There was only one sub in those days. One sub for the cup final, yeah, once, and he didn't even have that opportunity. And a lot of people said afterwards, Gibbo, I mean, I didn't tell the Chronicle any of this at the time because they would have wanted the story.
It would have been quite a big story, actually, and probably negative attention
story,
on him.
Page one, and every national would have took it. But he was my pal. And that meant more to me, and that's why I had these friendships. And I didn't feel I let the newspaper down, and I'll tell you why. Because A, the story never come out elsewhere, so they didn't lose the scoop that the Mail got or somebody else got. And B, that one story would have finished me with Stuart Barraclough and perhaps other players who would have felt you let him down there, Gibbo, you could have supported him. And I got 10 stories because I respected him and that one didn't come out. I got 10 stories later on because he felt he owed me a debt of gratitude. And the wonderful thing is, in 76, when we got to the League Cup final, 2 years later just, Nutley was injured, which was bad news, our skipper, but who went in the team to play in Nutley's position? Barraclough. So 2 years later, he played in the cup final for Newcastle at Wembley. So that was super.
Oh, wow. What a story.
Oh.
So, yeah. And we're going to continue now. Now we're going into the late 80s. Now, during this period, the Magpie Group and Sir John Hall, they became locked in quite a bitter battle, actually, with the club, with the Newcastle United board. Yeah. And throughout the whole thing, I understand you were used as a go-between, meeting up with certain directors for unofficial talks. Please tell me about that.
Yeah, it was intriguing. I was actually a member of the Magpie Group, which is the group that John Hall formed to launch this assault on Newcastle United. Doesn't sound vaguely familiar with today? Fans going up in arms about the board and trying to get them thrown out. I mean, do we ever learn? Does it ever change? But that's what John Hall was trying to do. And he felt that he needed a mouthpiece before he could take on the board so that he could speak direct to the fans. Without a mouthpiece, a public mouthpiece, he had no chance. And we agreed to be that mouthpiece. Graham Stanton was the editor. I think it was a courageous decision of the editor to put our name to. This was a bunch of fans, albeit some rich fans and influential fans, but just fans, taking on a board that had been steeped in the Newcastle United tradition for about 80 years. The directorships were passed from father to son. Now, if we lost the Magpie Group, and therefore the Chronicle who was supporting them, we are in deep trouble. And I was appointed by the editor to be the representative of the Chronicle on the Magpie Group and would therefore carry all the stories. Now, remember right at the start, taking a phone call from a Newcastle United director in the office, and he was phoning from St. James's Park, and he said, Gibson, when this is all over and you've lost, you will never get into St. James's Park again.
Oh, my word, the pressure.
And of course, being full of bravado, stupid bravado, while twitching like a fried egg, I replied, excuse me, when we take over this club, you will never be in the club again. And, from there it went, and it was 2 years of bloody fighting. And I was meeting members of the board. It was ridiculous. I felt like James Bond. It was absolutely ludicrous. I went to one meeting in a director's house to talk about the possibility of you know, a couple of them breaking ranks with the rest of the board and coming on our side if they could keep their power afterwards. And he took me into the kitchen when we got quarter way through the talks, and he took me into the kitchen because he wanted to tell me something, put a proposal to me. And we stood by the sink, and he turned the cold tap full on so that it was running, so that if I was wired up,
it wouldn't hear.
It wouldn't record because of the sound of the water while he made this proposition to me as a safeguard. So it did. So I'm standing wondering why the hell I'm standing by the sink with this tap. I'm going to turn the tap off because I'm thinking he's turned it on, forgotten about it. He's going to make us a cup of tea or something. And he told me that was so I couldn't record. I met the same guy 3 weeks later. We arranged to meet at a certain place, and I was instructed by the Magpie group when I met him to get him out of there in case he bugged that place and take him to another place that he didn't know about, so that we could talk there in case the original place was bugged and he was going to record what I was saying. And I mean, it was an incredibly intense time, and it lasted over 2 years. And some days you thought, you're there, we've won, we're going to win, because it was different to today. Then, if you could buy up the shares, and we were trying to pick off individual directors and shareholders, if you could buy up the shares, they couldn't stop you. And the shares were in the hands of about 300 people. We travelled all over the country buying shares from a little old lady in Cornwall that inherited them from my grandfather.
No.
Whereas now, one person owns Newcastle United, Mike Aston, so there's nobody else you can deal with. You just got it was very, very different in those days. And within 2 years, when we were on the cusp of winning, and I realised we're going to win, and I'm thinking, terrific. And then I suddenly woke up one morning and I thought, God almighty, this is only the start of it. What if we've got in and we've made such a song and dance for 2 years? What if it all goes pear-shaped? What if results don't improve? The crowd expects something. What if what we now do doesn't have an impact? It's just more of a nothingness with Newcastle United. Luckily, I needn't have worried, because we got John Hall, who went out, appointed Kevin Keegan as manager, who had never managed a football club in his life, had spent the last 8 years in Spain playing golf, was totally out of touch with football here. We made him manager, and then with John Hall's financial backing, we went off building the entertainers and got some of the greatest players this club has ever seen, and went from the brink of the old third division, where in Keegan's first quarter season, we would have gone in the third division had we lost Leicester, and we didn't. And we went all the way to runners up in the Premier League in no space of, and built the entertainers, smashing the record, the club transfer record, every time along the way until we paid a world record fee to bring Alan Shearer here. So pray God, thank you, God. Thank you, Kevin Keegan, and thank you, John Hall, that it actually worked. The only sadness is that Kevin Keegan took to his toes, John decided to retire, etc., etc. So it didn't go on for an eternity. But for a glorious window, we had something that was very, very special.
Absolutely. And that's actually when I started supporting the club. So it was about 95 when I went to my first game. My dad
was easy then, you know.
It's probably the best. Similar to you, how you started your career. I mean, you started your sports writing career winning Newcastle, winning European trophies. I started my Newcastle, love affair with the club at a time where I thought, wow, this is the best club in the world. I'm so happy. I'm so proud. There's positive, growth. The whole club was evolving, and it was a really exciting, defining era.
Can I ask you a question, as you're asking me 10? I'll ask you one.
Yeah.
I suspect, without knowing, that your love affair with the entertainers who were so entertaining might have had something to do with David Ginola. Yeah?
David Ginola.
I thought it might. I haven't met a lady that supported Newcastle in the 90s that wasn't turned on to them by David Ginola.
Absolutely, 100%. He was definitely my first love. To be fair, the whole group of entertainers, if you look at the hair, they had great hair. They modelled the jerseys perfectly, and it was very diverse, you know, and they were just a fantastic bunch. But yeah, David Ginola definitely had my heart from a very young age.
Yeah, I thought it might be. I thought it might be.
Yeah.
He was a super guy as well. And one of the things I loved about him at the time when he first signed for us, because I was a smoker at the time. I've given it up for about 20 years now, but at that stage, I was a smoker. And I arranged to do an interview with him at St. James's Park. And he turned up, walked in, you know, smooth as it's possible to be, said, I'm going to take a box upstairs, one of the private boxes, to the girl on reception. Send coffee and biscuits up for Mr. Gibson and I, and walked upstairs looking absolutely immaculate. I mean, he made Cary Grant look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. You know, he looked so terrific. And he says, you don't mind if I do you? And he unzipped his bag, which had all his stuff in from training at Durham, and he pulled out this packet of cigarettes, which were these very long and very thin tipped French cigarettes. And I said, you'll do for me, kid. A player that actually smoked. And what's more, he gave me one. So I thought, this is heaven. I've got to make this interview last as long as possible because I want another one of them. And he was absolutely terrific. And it was a big period. My only regret is that we didn't win the league, which we deserved to win. The year when we blew a 12-point lead and Man United won again. If we'd won that, it would have changed the history of Newcastle United forever.
You've been there from, you know, early days up until now. But at the start of this pivotal phase, you know, when Kevin Keegan got on board and these fantastic signings were coming through the door, at what point did you realise, like, wow, this phase is really going to make footballing history, whether or not we go on to lift the title?
Yeah.
When did you realise the significance of that?
I think I realised it very early doors because I was in a privileged position, you've got to remember. Having been a member of the Magpie group, at that spell, it was almost too easy for me as a reporter because I was still part of the Magpie group as far as John Hall, Douglas Hall, Freddie Shepherd, Freddie Fletcher, who was the guy that pulled the strings behind the scenes. He was called the Rockweiler because he never let go when he got a hold of somebody. He shook the life out of it. And so I was often up a couple hours just sitting in the boardroom, chatting over what they might do and what they might not do and who they might go for. And I always remember when we signed Rule of Fox, for example, from Norwich, they just said, get in the car. And I'm sitting in the car with Douglas Hall, Terry McDermott, who was Keegan's number 2, Keegan and I, going down to Norwich. There it is, Terry Mac and KK. Going down to Norwich to sign Rule Fox. Well, you suddenly wake up and you pinch yourself and say, wait a minute, you have a hat. And yet you're sitting in here with the top, you know, the top branch guys. There were very, very special times, but you knew the only worry I had, I never doubted where we were going to go, right to the top of the Premier League. The only worry I ever had is that we had 2 very volatile guys running the club, volatile in the nicest possible way, and that was John Hall and Kevin Keegan. And both huge egos, which are necessary for very successful men. You don't find anybody that's hugely successful that hasn't got an edge to them. It's an impossibility.
That's true.
You're not going to survive in the world that you've got to live in. And I always felt that one of them, especially KK, because I'd known him as a player up here, could take to his toes at any time. And that would change the whole situation within St. James's Park. And that is, in fact, what changed it in the end. KK did take to his toes, as he was always going to at some stage. And not because KK had gone, but because John Hall was involved in talks with Bobby Robson, etc., to take over. But John Hall, his wife, the Lady May, lovely, lovely lady, was always on to him to retire. You know, take some time and smell the roses. You know, you've built up this huge business, Cameron Hall Developments, Newcastle United, knighted by the Queen, etc., etc. You're going to die still working hard. You know, take some time off. Let's go around the world. Let's enjoy ourselves. And he eventually gave in to that. and handed over the power at Newcastle United to his son Douglas and to Freddie Shepherd. And while he still owned the shares, he no longer took part. And I think losing within a very short space of time the charisma of John Hall and of Kevin Keegan in one fell swoop changed the history and stopped Newcastle being what we might have been. And we went backwards until we got Bobby Robson again. And he dragged us up by our coattails. Wonderful, wonderful man. Fascinating. You couldn't remember anybody's name, you know. I mean, it was lovely. No, you couldn't remember what to call you. And he used to get it all wrong. I mean, I knew him from being England manager because he was a North East lad. He was a Geordie lad. And I used to do talk-ins for them all over the country when he was England manager. And when he was at Ipswich, they had a little forward called Eric Gates, who later played for Sunderland. And this day he's watching him at training. And he's irritated because he's making the wrong runs to get the ball up front, and he's keep yelling across, Sykesy, Sykesy. And of course, nobody's taking any notice. He's called Sykesy, Sykesy. And nobody says, so his assistant, who was refereeing the game, thinks, I better stop this and find out what the gaffer's on about. So he called the halt of the game, and he went over to the gaffer. He said, hey, gaffer, what are you on about? He says, Sykesy, he's not making the run. He's checking out. He's coming back. He's got to go down the channel. And now he says, Sykesy. He says, him. Now, he was talking about Eric Gates, but he was calling him Eric Sykes after the comedian. So yeah, he's yelling Sykesy at him, and nobody knows what he's talking about. I mean, he went to his big love, apart from football in Newcastle United, was cricket. He adored cricket. He played league cricket. He played league cricket as a young man in Durham Senior League up here. And he adored cricket. When he was here, our training ground was just next to Durham's county cricket ground. So he used to wander over there after every game to watch the cricket and what was happening when it was the summer. And he was invited to Lord's to be the speaker at the annual dinner in Lord's. And for somebody that wasn't in cricket to be given the chief speaker, and he was an excellent speaker, was wonderful. And he got up to speak and he said, I would just like to say that this is one of the greatest honours I've ever had in my life because I adore cricket so much. He said, as you probably know, I was lucky enough to play football for England. He said, and I was lucky enough to manage England in the 1990 World Cup final. We got to the semi-final. He said, but if only once I could have captained England at cricket and walked out here. He said, like Len Hutton and like Gatting and Braley. He said, even like Ian Botham, who only did it on one occasion. Or he said, like Saddam Hussein. And everybody went, what? Saddam Hussein? And of course he meant Nasser Hussein, who was the captain at the time. And everybody went, what? And then burst out laughing. But Bobby thought, I am doing well here, they're enjoying me. I thought we'd got the wrong bloke in Iraq where Saddam Hussein. He was really captain of England's cricket side. But he had a warm heart. And while everybody had a bit of fun with him because he couldn't remember people's names, Jack Johnson was the same thing. Waddle and Beardsley were Jack Johnson's greatest two players at Newcastle United, and he couldn't remember their names, so he called them Big Lad and Little Lad, which was a Geordie accent out of Ashton. And while Waddle didn't mind being called Big Lad, Beardsley hated being called Little Lad. But that's what he did. And but Bobby's legacy here was wonderful, and the fact that he was sacked 4 or 5 games into the start of a new season was horrendous. It was a dreadful time, but happy memories, and even more happy memories now when you think what's happened to the club since those days.
Exactly. And it's interesting because last week I was interviewing Warren Barton, who obviously was there, you know, from Kevin Keegan, Kenny Dalglish, even Rude Hullett. And then obviously I asked him about Sir Bobby Robson, and he had a lot to say because as I remember it, it was a crucial transition period, you know, like the entertainers, the backbone of the entertainers were reaching mid-30s, and then reinforcements had to be made. And I asked Warren Barton how he thinks Sir Bobby Robson dealt with this pivotal period, and he said he couldn't have done a better job. And he said a really interesting, he said, amongst many other things about him being a great manager tactically and a true gentleman, he said that he loved how he always made time for the fans. He would always just sit there and chat for hours on end with anyone who'd want to talk about anything.
Absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing was the minute he got the job and he come up and he stayed in the Gosford Park Hotel in Newcastle, and he gave us a bell. He said, Gibbo, come across, we'll have a chat. And it wasn't for the newspaper. He was wanting to have a chat because we'd done a lot of gigs together in the past. And he just wanted to pick as many brains as he could at what was happening with the club. And I remember him saying to me, he said, I've got to get Shearer on side. He said, my first job is I've got to get Shearer on side. Shearer had fallen out big time with Wood Hullett.
Oh, yeah.
And Rob Lee had, who's Shearer's best mate, etc., etc. And he said, I've got to get it. He's the key for me. I've got to get him on side. He said, well, they were playing at Chelsea on Saturday. He said, I'm going to go down on the Friday night. I'm just going to knock on Alan's door and sit in Alan's room all night, chatting football and winning him over. And I remember Alan telling me later, because Alan was a good pal, that he told him how he was just playing flat with his back right up against the goal when he should have been half turned, so you can see, and that split second makes all the difference to his game, and saying how important he was to him and that. And out of that, the first home game for Bobby Robson as Newcastle's manager was against Sheffield Wednesday up here, and they won 7. And Alan Shearer scored 5. And on the first game Bobby played, and I just phoned up Bobby the next morning. I said, I tell you what, pal, I think you won over Alan Shearer, all right, going by last night, like, you know. And Alan Shearer is still now the patron of his foundation for cancer, you know, the Bobby Robson Foundation.
Yes.
When Bobby sadly passed away, Alan took over as patron of that and is still doing that today. But lovely man. I went out and stayed with him when he was manager at Porto. I went out and stayed with him. I was going out for 4 days, you know, how a Geordie does abroad, you know. Sort of is. How did I understand him to start with? And I went out and stayed with him. And I changed. Yeah, I went Newcastle, London, Paris, Lisbon, Porto. Inevitably, my luggage got lost and all that. And I arrived just myself without any luggage. So so he gave me, I've got a toothbrush, that's all. So he gave me a load of his gear to wear. And it was a Porto blazer with a Porto badge on, a Porto tie. And of course, I was feted round town because they thought I was a Geordie being appointed by the manager to something inside the club. And it was, you know, Miss Howard. So everywhere I went, I was sort of, and he gave us a bell. He said, this night we're going out for dinner. And he said, look, he said, I've got an interpreter that works with me because he didn't speak Portuguese, Bobby. I mean, didn't speak English. He only spoke Geordie. But he said,
that's a whole different language altogether, isn't it?
Absolutely. So he says, I've got a interpreter with me. Can he come out for dinner with us? You know, I said, of course, I don't mind. That's great. And this handsome guy, as Portuguese guys, you know, young Portuguese guys, not bad looking, nearly as good as Ginola. And so he was sitting there having dinner with us, and we had a few photographs taken. It was only years later I dug the photographs out because I thought, I realised who that guy. I dug the photographs out again, and sure enough, it was Jose Mourinho, who was his interpreter that night. He started off so he could speak Portuguese to the Portuguese players. Then when Bobby went down to Barcelona in Sporting Lisbon, he took him down as one of his coaches, and that's how Bobby started. That's how Mourinho started in management. And to this day, whenever he comes to St. James's Park, be it with Chelsea or now Spurs, etc., not for the press or not for anybody, he goes out with a wreath of flowers down to the Bobby Robson statue and puts the flowers on the statue and blows a kiss to the gaffer that got him started. and he was the one on those photographs. If I'd known at the time, I would have taken more notice of him. I didn't know him at the time. I thought, he's good looking enough. He doesn't need talking to. I'll talk to Bobby. And he turned out to be Josie Mourinho. But these are the things that make for lovely, warm memories of special times, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I didn't expect that. I was thinking, okay, Portuguese, okay, interpreter. Who could this
Exactly.
be?
Staggering,
Jose
isn't it?
Mourinho.
It
I'm
was
like,
Mourinho. And he absolutely adores Bobby, and so he should. He owes him a great deal.
It seems right to talk about more recent Newcastle affairs. And obviously, you've worked closely on the ups and downs of football and all the politics that come with it on Tyneside for years.
Yeah.
From Mike Ashley's reign as owner, controversies, relegations, failed takeovers. Can you shed light on, in your opinion, the lowest point of the club and how difficult it is to report and write during the low times? There's obviously an emotional attachment there.
Sure. I knew there had to be a downer, you know. We've had such a fun time reminiscing over glorious things.
Yeah.
There had to be a downer. And the minute you mentioned Mike Ashley, I realised what the downer was. We've had 13 years of Mike Ashley, and if anybody has owned a club in a vastly different way to the way John Hall owned it, when he ran it with Kevin Keegan, who, by the way, deserves massive appreciation, because it was Kevin Keegan that decided on the signings. It often isn't the manager these days. It's often the director of football or the chief scout. It was Keegan that signed all the great players for us at that time. Ashley's 13 years, which unfortunately are still continuing as we talk, have been nothing but walking through treacle for Newcastle United fans. All we've got to show for it is 2 relegations, which have obviously the lowest points have been that to go down twice. We've been very lucky to be able to come back at one go. But until recently, until Steve Bush come along and Ashley changed his stance, there was he didn't want us to bother with the domestic cups because he thought it would get in the way of staying in the league. His height of ambition is to keep Newcastle in the Premier League. Can you believe that with 50,000 Geordies inside St James's Park every home game before the pandemic, 50,000 Geordies, you're going to tell them that the height of your ambition is to remain in the Premier League when we used to win the FA Cup 3 times in 5 years, when we've won a European Championship, when we've finished 2 successive seasons runner-up in the Premier League, when we spent a world record fee on Alan Shearer, and you're going to tell these fans the height of ambition. And when he stopped us having a pop at the 2 domestic cups, the FA Cup and the League Cup, he was effectively banishing all young Newcastle United supporters from ever seeing what I saw, which was Newcastle United win something. Because the only chance we had of winning anything is the FA Cup or the League Cup, and it still is, because we're not going to win the Premier League title. So our chance of winning something is those 2 cups, and we didn't even bother with them. And he wanted to change the name of the ground, St James's Park, which has been there for 128 years. We just had the birthday last week. We weren't bothering with the domestic cups. He gave us Joe Kinnear and Steve McLaren as managers. He gave us Dennis Wise to... Is there a misnomer or what? Wise. I mean, dear, oh dear, oh dear. And he insulted 2 of the greatest legends we've ever had, which was Keegan and Shearer, when they were doing a managerial job at Newcastle. I'm not saying they were good enough necessarily to be made Newcastle managers forever, but you do not treat legends with the contempt that they were treated. And that didn't go down well with fans at all. And I'm afraid the only piece of good news that Mike Ashley's produced as far as Newcastle United fans are concerned is saying that he's willing to sell. But our luck, the Geordie luck, somebody comes from Saudi Arabia and wants to put millions and millions and millions into this club and could turn it into Chelsea under Abramovich or Manchester City under the Arab ownership that they've got. Could do that to us. But at the last minute, the Premier League stops it. And now Ashley, who's hated by the fans, is trying to sue the Premier League to get the thing through. So Ashley's now on the side of the fans. It's only this club that could produce anything like that. But it's one of the reasons I adore the club, because you know what? We may not have won anything, but I'll tell you something, I've never been bored, not for 1 minute of this whole run. You can't be bored following Newcastle United.
Not at all. And you truly are a legend of Northeast journalism and sport. You've been covering Newcastle United for over 5 decades. Yeah. And to celebrate 50 years of your service, the Variety Club, Variety Club of Great Britain, they honoured you in the presence of so many high-profile guests. Yeah, stars of Northeast football, whoever somebody was there. How did it feel to get that recognition? I mean, after covering sports stories for so many years, and to have all that attention just shift on your incredible achievements.
It was a wonderful, wonderful moment. I was very humbled by it, because you don't expect that when you're a kid in Benwell with your backside hanging out a pair of grey shorts. you don't think that, anything like that would happen to you. And it was a wonderful moment, because they put on a stretched limo for me and I've got 3 daughters who were in there, and a couple of the grandkids, and taking all the photographs. It draws up outside the hotel, and John Hall and Peter Beardsley and Steve Harper and Glenn McCall, all there clapping us in. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful moment. To think it's been a long road, it's been a difficult road at times, but I've enjoyed every minute of it. And, people have said, having completed 50 years, and bear in mind that's very difficult, because it means you've got to start in your early 20s and go beyond retirement age of 65 to be able to do 54 years. Now, the odds are that the company doesn't want you to stay on after you're 65. So I've been lucky enough in that situation to be able to continue, and I'm still continuing today, and it's 54 years unbroken since I came back from Fleet Street, unbroken, covering Newcastle United. And I think the great train robber's got a lesser sentence than that. Yeah, but I've done 54. I've done 54 years. And a lot of people say to me, well, why don't you retire, Gibbo? Why didn't you retire? And I say, well, I'll tell you why. Because if I retired, I would want to go and watch Newcastle United play, because it's the love of my life. Newcastle United. I'd want to go and watch them play. Now, that would cost me a fortune for a season ticket. I would probably be stuck in the back of the stand up there. I'm actually got one of the best seats in the ground, and somebody is stupid enough to actually pay me to sit in it, which is the Chronicle. I said, so why should I retire? I said, and in fact, as long as I keep my marbles, and I said, if I don't, well, I won't know I haven't retired, because I'll be gaga. But as long as I keep my marbles, I'm going to keep writing, and I'm not going to retire until the day Newcastle win a meaningful trophy, one of the big trophies. So, as I always say, you're all invited to my 100th birthday party.
That is amazing. I was going to end on your final wish, and I was going to say, are you actually refusing to retire until Newcastle wins something again? Yeah. And the way you put it, I don't blame you.
I am, because I want to bookend the whole of my life. And it started off with Newcastle winning things when I was a kid with the 3 FA Cups in 5 years. And then when I was a young hack, winning a European trophy. And I wanted to end with them winning something else.
Full circle.
Which is the reason I want Ashley out, by the way, because I'll never win anything with Ashley in. So I want to win something at the end of that before I retire. And now the only consideration I've got is that if some lovely Arabs or somebody come along with a load of money and take over Newcastle United, could we win something within 2 years, and I'll be forced to either retire or die? Because I think I want to get, I think I want Newcastle to win something when I'm about 96, because I'll be ready then just to say, that was great, tar very much, off I go. So I'm a bit torn as to when we've got to win this big prize. I don't want it to be next week, because I don't want to retire yet. But of course, I might just cheat. I might let me win something and not retire. That would be perfect. But it's been a happy time, and it is my great desire to see Newcastle win something again, not just from my point of view, but for fans, you know. We are going, there's no better fans than Newcastle United fans. They're cradle to grave fans. They don't, Manchester United prawn cocktail sandwich brigade, they've got supporters all over the country who've never been to Manchester in their life. They just jumped on Ferguson's bandwagon. We support Newcastle because we were born up here. It's been our way of life, and it doesn't matter how far we sink down, we'll come back and we'll stay loyal because we are Newcastle United. And I don't want there to be a generation of Newcastle fans never seeing Newcastle United win something. Never having the joy I had in 1969 when I sat out in Budapest on a lovely warm June day in what had been glorious sunshine all day and see Newcastle win something. I think that's going to happen again. It'll happen in your lifetime, but I want it to happen in mine.
Well, I hope it happens in both our lifetimes. Preferably within the next 3 years would be fantastic. We'll have to see what happens with the takeover.
Yeah.
Let's hope for the best. Gibbo, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for speaking to me and sharing your stories. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. It's been my privilege. Lovely to talk to you. Hope to do it again shortly. After we've won something.
After we won something, we'll do a winning special.
Nice.
I'm sure the viewers have, been just as happy as I have to hear all these stories. Guys, if you want to see any more Newcastle content, remember to subscribe, like this video if you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching. Bye from us.
Bye-bye.